5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
First, live, local. This is Fox 12 Now.
Everyone, this is Fox 12 Now. I'm Greg Nibbler. Thank you very much for joining us today. Wherever you are, we do appreciate it. Of course, we are live streaming here every weekday, starting about 1 p.m. Pacific, and we are on YouTube, we're on social media, we're on our website, we're on our app, so lots of places to find us, and of course, watch the segments that we get to talk about afterward and share those as well. Today, we are talking about something that's really, well, as it says there in the title, there's a lot to unpack with this, a 50-year-old mystery, over 50 years actually. You may remember the book, Go Ask Alice, and if you don't, we'll explain what that is, but this book was purported to be a journal of a teen girl. It came out in the 70s. She was going through some of the woes of drug addiction and various other things that happened to her in that journal, and that was published, and it became a phenomenon. Millions and millions of copies of it were sold. It influenced everything from politics to legislature to all kinds of things, and just became a cultural phenomenon. And the thing is, was that even real, and who was Alice? There is a book that tackles that mystery, and that's what we're talking about right now. We've got Portland author and legend Rick Emerson here joining us right now. Rick, thank you very much for being here today and to talk about this. And, you know, to start off, there's so much just that I just said that if people don't understand what Go Ask Alice is, could you give us just the basic trainer course here on what this is?
Absolutely. It's great to be here. Go Ask Alice is a book, as you said, came out in 1971, and it purports to be the authentic, the genuine posthumous diary of a teenage drug addict. This girl who gets lured into drug use, somebody slips LSD into her soda at a party, and then so she's sort of pulled into drug use and falls in with the fabled bad crowd, runs away from home, and then sort of tries to clean up, relapses, tries to clean up, relapses, and then ultimately dies at the age of 17 and leaves behind this diary, which then her parents arranged to have published as a sort of warning, or as a way to help other parents or other teenagers who were facing the same issue. And as you said, it came out and it was and still is presented as being a real diary. It literally says on the front, Go Ask Alice, a real diary by Anonymous. And it sold somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 million copies. It was translated into 16 languages. It was a Emmy-nominated made-for-TV movie. And it really helped to do two things. Go Ask Alice helped to kind of create the young adult genre as we now think of it. I mean, there were books for young people before, but they were more like children's books. They tackled, subjects that weren't very controversial or weren't very edgy. Go Ask Alice really kind of created the modern young adult book. It also helped to kind of galvanize the drug war, which is really picking up at that point. Richard Nixon, in particular, viewed LSD as being almost public enemy number one in terms of drugs, almost more than anything else. And Go Ask Alice really helped to cement the idea of LSD as being this absolute unalloyed evil. And it really helped to form a lot of people's ideas about what drugs were and about how to best combat them.
And that's because of that popularity of it, of so many people reading that. And I would imagine at that time, too, this was an inside look, or people thought was an inside look into what teenagers in America were going through and what they were
Definitely, because then as now, I mean, there was the fabled generation gap, and coming off the 60s, where there'd been so much social upheaval and there'd been so much distance between teenagers and parents, and the fashions were changing and hairstyles were changing and music was changing, and parents felt so alienated from their kids, and parents were understandably frightened about a lot of things that they saw imperiling their kids. And drugs were definitely, drugs are a danger, and drugs can definitely cause a lot of damage, and parents were really worried about that. There was another thing that was happening at that point, which was unprecedented in American society, which was the number of teenage runaways had been increasing every year throughout the 60s. And, it hit an all-time high in 1970. But it wasn't just the number of runaways, it was who they were. Because for the very first time, there'd always been runaways, but for the very first time, Runaways, I think in 1970, the average American runaway was a 15-year-old white girl from the suburbs. And that was new. That had never happened before. And as is regrettably the case in American culture, a lot of times it takes things getting to the suburbs or entering a certain kind of culture before people, before there's a lot of mainstream attention paid to it. And Go Ask Alice came out, and Go Ask Alice said, not only are you correct to be worried about those things, but here's an actual insider account so you'll know what's really going on, because it's not like your teenagers are going to tell you. It's not like you can sit down and have this heart-to-heart with your kids about drugs, maybe. So now here's this posthumous teenage diary. And it was compelling because a diary is fascinating, but of course, you're never supposed to read somebody else's diary. It's this unspeakable taboo. You're never supposed to do that. And so here was a book that said, well, you're not only allowed to read this person's diary, but you actually should read this person's diary. It's actually good for you to read this person's diary. And so because of that and a lot of other things, and there's just never been a book like it, Go Ask Alice really came out and made a huge impact.
I mean, with all of those different facets too that you just mentioned, as far as it making an impact, whether it's young adult genre and then just everything else going from there. But obviously there's a but to this. And I guess this is maybe where you come in, where you wanted to write a book about this. Can you tell us how you got involved in this and what really spurred you to want to dig deeper into this?
So like a lot of people, I discovered Go Ask Alice when I was a teenager. I was probably 14 or so. I walked into my high school library and there was a just returned shelf. And on the just returned shelf, I saw this copy of this book, and there was this cover, and it's this girl with this sort of half shadowed face, and it says Go Ask Alice, and then below it just those magical 5 words. It says a real diary by Anonymous. And I was like, oh, I gotta read that. And so I took it home and I read it, and my memory is actually that I read it twice in a row. But it was, but of course it's by Anonymous, and there's a little note from the editors inside, but there's no hint about who this Alice girl, who she really was. And I remember talking to a friend of mine, and I was like, well, who wrote it? And she's like, well, it's anonymous, and I said, yeah, but who is it? And she's like, well, nobody knows. That's why it says by Anonymous. And I remember thinking, well, how can nobody know? Somebody somewhere has to know. And that kind of percolated in my head, for a long, long time. And I lived through not just the drug war and the sort of Nancy Reagan just say no phase of the drug war, but then a few years later, when I was in high school, as a senior or junior, that was when what we now call the Satanic Panic sort of emerged. And it was this 15-year literal witch hunt that spread across the country. And the idea was that there were just these platoons of Satanists underground that were just waiting to lure your children into black magic. What I didn't know at the time, what nobody knew at the time, actually, is that both of these things, the drug war and the Satanic Panic, were, if not started, they were accelerated by a pair of teenage diaries. Go Ask Alice, the drug war, and then the Satanic Panic was spurred by this other teenage diary called Jay's Journal, which is also a posthumous teenage diary. What I did not know is that both of those books came from the same place. When I learned that Go Ask Alice and this other teenage diary, Jay's Journal, both came from this giant house with blood red walls on the outskirts of Provo, Utah, and that nobody else had really investigated that story. That's kind of when I was sort of all in at that point.
Yeah, and this is nonfiction. This is a true story. So just in case anybody when you say a blood red house outside of Provo, I mean, it sounds made up, but this is actually what happened. And I guess, to ask this question, this is something for the book, Beatrice Sparks. Can you tell us who she is and how this is connected?
Yeah, Beatrice Sparks always presented herself as the, quote, editor of Go Ask Alice. The sort of official story was that Beatrice Sparks, who was a married mother of 4 living in Provo, Utah. She's very conservative. She was a Mormon, a Latter-day Saint. And she had always presented herself as this woman who had edited this girl's diaries into Go Ask Alice. And the story was that she had worked at a counselor as a sort of summer youth camp for kids, and that while there she had met this girl from California who had issues with drugs and some personal issues, and that after the girl died, her diaries went to Beatrice Sparks, who then edited them for publication to help other people. That was always the official story. And how do I put this? I mean, might be a little bit more convincing if she had not then continued to find other teenage diaries that all sort of read the same and all made the same points and had the same sort of moral voice to them. But 8 years after, quote, editing Go Ask Alice, she then came forward with this other teenage diary that she had come into possession of that was called Jay's Journal, that was sort of a sibling book. And instead of being a teenage girl, it was a teenage boy. It was a 16-year-old young man who supposedly got into black magic and devil worship and then ended up taking his own life. And so 8 years after Go Ask Alice kind of cements this idea of LSD luring you into this world of destruction and death, Jay's Journal comes out and is another posthumous diary that says, well, the reason your teenage son is unhappy, the reason your teenage son is belligerent and obnoxious, the reason your teenage son may be thinking about suicide, it's devil worship. And here's a posthumous diary that proves it. And, again, at the time, nobody really knew that both of those diaries came from the same place.
I mean, that is coming from the same place. I mean, they certainly knew how to tap into what was going on culturally and also to exacerbate anything that was happening at the same time. So I'm sure that's why they sold so much. I'm sure on top.
Well, definitely. Just, as Go Ask Alice came out, right, as I said, as the drug war was launching and there was this panic over teenage runaways, and Jay's Journal came out right as there was this huge fear among parents about, well, the 60s are long gone, but my kid is still being obnoxious. I still don't understand him. He still won't talk to me. And there was a lot of fear in mainstream America about what at the time they would have called new or Eastern faiths, which is, kids getting into meditation, kids getting into Buddhism, things that they heard about from the Beatles in some cases. And at the time in mainstream America, that was a little unnerving. And here was a book again that it said, here is why your teenager is into all these things you don't understand.
Well, for you, going into research this, I mean, obviously we've got the book here, Unmask Alice, which we're going to, that I want people to know about. So what did it take to go in and research this? Like, how much time did it go to dig through and find out? And obviously we're not going to, tell everybody everything from the book, but what did it take to actually go in and research this and find out all of this information?
I started out the way that a lot of people, start with everything now, is I just went to Google, because at first I assumed that somebody else had already told the story. I just took it. I assumed that this book had already been written. I thought, well, I can't be the only person who's interested in this. And I went online, and what I found pretty quickly is that there were just the same handful of articles and the same handful of sort of blog posts, all kind of recycling the same few facts and the same bits of supposition. And nobody had really done any sort of deep look into it. And in fact, I think when I started this in 2015, there was a 4-page article from 1979 that at that point was still the most in-depth thing that had ever been written. And so I realized pretty quickly that nobody has really looked kind of past the surface on this. And so then I sort of had to go, analog. I ended up tracking down, writing letters to people, a lot of which would come back undeliverable, or just, unopened at least. I would try to find people's phone numbers, which is a thing that used to be far easier than it is now. And then eventually it got to where I was literally going old school, where I was actually going and knocking on people's front doors. I mean, it was like some 1970s detective film, where I would literally have to knock on someone's door and stand on their porch and say, like, hello, my name is Rick Emerson. I'd like to talk to you about this book, Go Ask Alice. And, and then finding boxes and boxes of documents and archives and papers that had just been shoved into a basement somewhere that nobody had looked at in 50 years. So it kind of became an all-consuming thing pretty quickly.
Yeah, I would imagine so, especially digging through that, and probably it's like pulling out one thing, you find something else, you find something else, you find something else. Well, the book is out, and I want to give the full title just so everybody has it. So Unmask Alice, LSD, Satanic Panic, and the Imposter Behind the World's Most Notorious Diaries. So now that it's been out, and we're going to tell everybody how to get it as well, because it's coming out on paperback. What's the response been since this has been out there? Because, I mean, I'll tell you, even here in the newsroom, I was talking about this yesterday, and I could hear one of my coworkers talking about, oh yeah, I read Go Ask Alice and was interested in this. So, I mean, it's familiar to a lot of people. And now that this is out, what's the response been like?
I will say, just on a purely selfish level, it was nice to know that I didn't spend 7 years on a thing that no one else cares about. I mean, that was sort of like in the back of your head, there's always this voice going like, maybe nobody else really cares about this story that you're devoting almost a decade of your life to. But unsurprisingly, again, because Go Ask Alice is one of those books. It's sort of like, I mean, the only other the only thing from that era that I can sort of compare it to is a book like Flowers in the Attic, where it was sort of passed around, and it was almost this underground thing that teenagers read and then passed to their friends because it was tantalizing and taboo, and it was also, again, supposedly real, and so it had all of this sort of this aura of mystery and gravitas to it. And when I realized that nobody else had really told the story, I thought, well, I bet that a lot of other people who read this book and that it made an impression on have also been wondering about the actual backstory of this. And so it's been nice to see that, I think it sort of scratched a mental itch for a lot of people that's been there for a long time.
Right. People just having that wonder of all about it, or reading it when they were kids and then now thinking about it again. Well, for everybody out there, can you let them know where and how they can get a hold of the book and read this? And
it is available, as they say, wherever you buy books. There's a bunch of quick links on my website, which is just rickemerson.com or unmaskalice.com. It's available in hardcover as an ebook. It's also available as a fantastic audiobook, and I can say that because I didn't voice it. A woman named Gabra Zachman voiced it and did a great job. And it comes out in paperback on July 30th and makes a great gift for everybody literally every single person
There it is. Perfect. Rick Emerson, thank you very much for joining us here.
Thank you so much.
Now. For everybody watching again, we are live streaming here. We do this every weekday. We have more segments coming up at 1:30 p.m. So if you're watching live, you can come right back to where you are. At 1:30, we're actually going to be joined by, switching gears, U.S. Representative Andrea Salinas. So we're going to be talking about some of the measures that she's trying to get passed for bills and also geothermal heating. So I told you we cover a wide range of topics. That is a perfect example right there. So thanks for watching. Don't forget you can share these segments. You can watch them on the Fox 12 Oregon app. That's always a great way, or kptv.com, or of course wherever you're finding us right now. So feel free to share that show. We'll be back in a few. I'm Greg Nibbler. This is Fox 12 Now.